What is up, fam? Zach Beckwith here from Path to Self Wellness Center. I want to thank you guys for stopping by. This is where all the magic happens. We have our boxing group training, we have our functional strength training classes, yoga, personal training, physical therapy services, but most importantly, tune in to Path to Self podcast for all the raw truth. Fam, I'm your host, Zach Beckwith, and welcome to Path to Self podcast, where we do more unlearning than we do learning. Join me while we dismantle conditioned beliefs and delusions that keep us sick, stuck, and profitable, while we provide a more empowering and root cause approach to health and wellness. This is our first ever podcast, and I am so grateful for all of you for tuning in and joining me along this journey that we've had thus far with Path to Self. I want to first give a little shout out to my boy Mally J for helping me, motivating me to do this podcast and helping me produce it. So thank you very much, Mally J. With that being said, we're going to run this first podcast. We're going to go through our mission. We're going to go through our approach and a little bit about my story, our story, and what led us to opening Path to Self Wellness. So it is our mission to provide a holistic and preventative approach to health and wellness through optimizing one's movement quality, nutrition, mindset, and recovery. And those 4 points are our 4 pillars of wellness. If you work with me one-on-one, our entire approach is built around our 4 pillars of wellness. And I want you to think about those 4 pillars of wellness as a 4-legged chair. If any of those legs of the chair are unstable, the entire chair crumbles. So one leg of the chair is optimal movement. The second leg is proper nutrition. The third leg is mindset or mental health. And the fourth leg of the chair is rest and recovery. So I got this from one of my holistic doctors, Dr. Craig Fasulo, and this changed the game for me early on in my wellness journey. He made it very clear to me that if you saw a leg away, the entire chair crumbles. And that is the same thing with our health and wellness. Many of us are focusing solely on exercise or solely on nutrition or mental health or our recovery, but they all have to be in unison. They all have to be stable, or else we don't have that solid foundation. And that is our approach that we take here at Path to Self Wellness. With that being said, I want to get into a little bit about my journey. I'm super excited about starting this podcast because many of you know I've been very, very vocal through the last 4 to 6 years, specifically the last 4 years through this pandemic. And I've since opening the business and since being, permanently banned from TikTok, having my Instagram and Facebook accounts banned and shadow banned for periods of time, I've kind of tapered my voice down. And I think it's time to come back. And I think this podcast is really going to provide not just myself, but my entire family and community to really come together and really share some truths, share our stories, and really bring us together. But I really look forward to being able to just break loose and get into some more long form content where I can really get into things in more depth than I can on Instagram and Facebook through short form video. So super excited for this. And once again, I want to thank you so much for tuning in and for all the continued support. It means the absolute world to me. So with that being said, let's get into a little bit about my story, my family's story. So for those of you who don't know, like I said, I'm Zach Beckwith. I am co-owner of Path to Self Wellness. I run our performance department or our wellness center in Gales Ferry. Like I said, I'm co-owner with my mother, Amy. She runs the shop in Norwich. I also have my lovely girlfriend, Cheyenne, who runs the mental health aspect of things in the wellness center, and our entire community. I mean, it started with me, Cheyenne, and Mom. My 2 little sisters run the shop, help with yoga, incredible friends, teachers, instructors that have come together and really turned Path to Self into so much more than I ever, I'm going to choke up already, so much more than I ever could have imagined. And, it's because of all of you guys tuning in and really making this as special as it's become. So I just want to, I don't want to tell everybody's story. I just want to kind of tell my story and what's kind of led me to opening Path to Self and where I am today. So I just want to make it very clear. I know when we get into talking about childhood, a lot of people kind of feel weird, especially when, we talk about our parents and our childhood, and it may seem like I'm targeting people or I'm targeting my parents. And I just want to preface with saying that I have the two best parents in the entire world. I couldn't do any of this without them. And what I'm going to share and get into is there's no hard feelings. We all do the best we can with the knowledge that we have, um, and so I'm just going to tell a little bit about my story. So I was raised in Canterbury, Connecticut. Two very young parents. I think my parents had me at 21 years old. So we're talking about kids raising kids. And with that being said, you know, all of my physical needs were met. My parents were at every ball game. They were beyond supportive. But one thing that I felt like lacked in our household early on was emotional intelligence and emotional regulation. And I think that um, that's a big thing in society right now. It's not talked about enough, but it'll definitely be talked about in this podcast. But like I said, emotional dysregulation. Our household was very explosive, and no physical abuse in any way at all. But we it was more yelling, screaming, separating, and then coming back together and pretending nothing really happened. So what that kind of developed early on for me is ADHD or ADD tendencies, where I was a little bit scattered, had a hard time focusing, hyper vigilant, but it's created a lot of my empathetic tendencies. You have a lot of people say, intuitive, or I'm an empath, and I really think a lot of that comes from childhood trauma or growing up in somewhat of chaotic or dysfunctional families. And we all have that. And there's nothing wrong with that. It turned me into who I am, and I wouldn't change a damn thing. But with that being said, my early journey with ADD was kind of the beginning of my journey. I utilized sports. I was a big time athlete, so I really utilized sports to meet a lot of my needs. I didn't realize this until later on when I didn't have sports, that it served me in so many different ways. Sports were a way that I let out some of my excess energy. It gave me validation. Um, it kind of made me who I was. My whole identity was around being an athlete. It's where I got my praise. It was my performance. It was my art, but it was also probably my first addiction. So early on, ADD kid, always out in the yard, always playing sports. And that kind of through um, led me through the earlier years where I really relied on that validation from my sports, from my performance side of things, that um, really, I think, saved me with my childhood. Um, I was always outside, always playing, um, and from there, it kind of led to some medication. Obviously, we'll get into a little bit later on with addiction and whatnot, but being a kid with ADD, I was medicated with Adderall early on. So I was always used to taking that substance to be normal. Me and my little sister, Courtney, were both diagnosed with ADD, ADHD, and that was kind of the beginning of it all. Um, and it wasn't until after high school that I no longer had sports. And a lot of that was because of my own doing. I chose the road of, being too focused on women, too focused on drugs, alcohol, and putting masks on to try to fit in where I never really belonged. And after I was done with high school and was done with sports, I really, really lost myself. And that's when addiction really took a hold. Um, Being a kid with ADHD and being medicated for it, all I knew was taking a pill to feel normal. I remember playing high school baseball and forgetting my midday Adderall, and I was like, "Oh my god, how can I play? How I'm going to strike out every time. I'm going to be making errors because I don't have my medicine." And that was huge. When you're dependent on a substance from a very early age, that changes your brain chemistry. That changes how you feel about yourself, that you're not whole without your medication. And then from there, having a hard time with my appetite being suppressed from the medication and having a hard time sleeping, I was then prescribed Klonopin, which helped me sleep. But these are two medications that no kid should ever have to take. It's now my belief that we should not be altering the children. We should be altering the system to help the children. I was never meant to be sitting in a classroom for 6 to 8 hours, but that's what happened. So, with that being said, my early 20s, late teens were riddled with addiction. Um, there's so much I could go into and so many little side spurts I can go into, but we're going to try to keep this one a little bit more short. So, the early 20s addiction was a really, really hard thing for me. For those of you who know my sister Courtney, she was also a hardcore addict and kind of took the front seat for me. So I never really saw myself as an addict because I was never that bad, which kind of kept me in it longer than I should have ever been in it. For those of you who know Courtney, shout out Courtney. She's a huge inspiration to all of us. But she was in a traumatic car accident and drunk driving car accident and suffered a traumatic brain injury. And that was her catalyst for change. It was kind of forced, but it was an eye opener for all of us. At that time, my parents were on the brink of divorce, and that pulled us all together. So um, I try to find the silver lining in everything, and I believe that that was God's will that my sister had that accident, and it really pulled us all together. Um, and that wasn't the end for me. My sister stopped doing heroin, alcohol, hard drugs, and I kind of took a back seat and continued down the path, and no one really knew about it. Was doing my best to take care of my little sister while my parents were at the hospital taking care of Courtney for, 6 to 8 months after that accident, and I felt so much shame and guilt having my sister just go through this terrible accident, having my family totally wrapped up in all of this, and I'm at home still numbing myself, still using substances to get by, and no one really knew about it. But I went through PTA school, physical therapy assistant school, um, all while using drugs, and it served a purpose for me, but it was really a catalyst of growth for me. It was I view addiction not as a incurable disease or something I'm a victim to, but it was more of a solution for me. I had a hard time regulating myself. I had a hard time understanding and regulating my emotions, and I used drugs and alcohol to numb myself and regulate. So it wasn't until I had a near death experience or ego death experience on LSD in a at a show in New York City that I had a massive awakening or an ego death experience. I will certainly get into that on another episode, but for now, that was a massive catalyst. And what happened in that moment is I was forced to sit in a corner with myself for hours on end, stuck in a loop, a life review where I was being shown all of my mistakes, all of my unconscious tendencies, and the way I was numbing myself, the way I was impacting everybody around me. And it was not until I finally surrendered, flushed hundreds of dollars of drugs down the toilet, and made the decision to be done with hard drugs. And that was it for me when it came to addiction. Now, that was just the beginning for me. Um, After flushing those drugs down the toilet, I felt a purge and a release inside of me that I can still feel. And it's so hard to explain that moment. But from that moment, I took 2 weeks off of work. At that time, I was working as a physical therapist assistant in a skilled nursing facility. I had incredible coworkers that supported me through it as I was very vulnerable and open with them. They allowed me to take 2 week leave to detox at my parents' house in my basement. And I detoxed myself off of those hardcore substances. And it was those moments that I knew something happened to me. My friends that I was using with were just kind of picking on me. And, you just had a bad trip, bro. It was a bad trip. Like, that's what it was. We've all had a bad trip, but I knew it was not just a bad trip. Um, and after sitting in that basement, detoxing and watching YouTube videos and really trying to get to the bottom of what did I just go through, I came to a video about ego death through psychedelics, and that's exactly what happened to me. And I, from that moment, started to get into meditation, yoga. I found my love for sports and exercise again. I started to eat better. I came into the information of Dr. Sebi, who, we'll get into that on another episode, but he was a massive catalyst for holistic health for me. And simply since that moment, my life's never been the same. That was when I started to record all my videos, trying to motivate others and just kind of share my journey and what led to my awakening. Because at one point or another, if we're lucky enough, we will all have that trigger where life changes. And it's usually when you're backed in a corner, and it's usually when you're at your lowest that you really have to turn in and face yourself. And that's why our slogan here at Path to Self Wellness is face yourself to free yourself. Is you can't be free if you're not looking at yourself, if you're not looking at your shadow. So a little bit more long-winded than I had expected, but with that being said, that was the beginning of my health journey. Um, Another little side note there that kind of led to us actually opening Path to Self Wellness was my sister, Courtney, once again. Um, she had a vaccine injury from the Gardasil vaccine, and we almost lost her. So that was massive for us. So, picture this awakening that I had. This was today the 11th. Holy cow! I think it's been 6 or 7 years since I've used hardcore drugs, and I think literally to the day 6 or 7 years. It's bad, I can't remember, but it was. But with this injury from the Gardasil vaccine, picture this awakening 6 years ago. I'm really doing the work on myself. Many of you had followed my journey, and then the pandemic happened. And at this point, I had already had my awakening, and it was the October before COVID had started in, I think, December or January. I decided to leave the skilled nursing facility in New London and entered more of an outpatient sports medicine clinic in Lisbon. And I had already started to wear a mask, not because I wanted to, let's make that very clear, but because I was refusing the flu vaccine. So after my sister's Gardasil vaccine injury, and the knowledge that I had gained through holistic health from my awakening, the information of Dr. Sebi and many other incredible holistic health practitioners and doctors, I realized the truth around um, the medical cartel, I guess I'll just kind of say, and just be very blunt. So I was already refusing the flu vaccine before COVID even came. So went to ECRC, very grateful to be there. But this was right at the beginning of the pandemic, and it started to get really serious, as all of you guys know, when they were really coming out with the rollout for this COVID-19 vaccine. And me, my girlfriend, and my family were very, very concerned around the mandates of this vaccine. And that's when we started to pull our heads together and say, we don't want to be mandated or forced into anything we're uncomfortable with. But as long as we're working for other other people, corporations, there's a chance we're going to be mandated into this. So we pulled our heads together. Me being into my holistic health, physical therapy, personal training, health coaching, nutrition. Um, I decided let's go forth with a wellness shop where I could have my personal training in the back room. Cheyenne could start her own private practice for mental health therapy. My mom and my sisters could run the shop, and we could start to build some financial freedom for ourselves where we could be our own bosses and would not be mandated into anything we were uncomfortable with. So that was the beginning of Path to Self Wellness. And luckily, I was able to stay at ECRC. Shout out ECRC, Penny Allen, for supporting me through that and not mandating that. Luckily, she runs a private physical therapy clinic. So we weren't ever mandated into doing anything like other corporations were making people do. But with that said, I was able to continue working as a physical therapist assistant while I got Path to Self off the ground with the help of my loved ones. And um, I think as of this past January, it'll be 2 years since we opened the shop in Norwich. And in May 6th, will be 1 year since we opened the wellness center in Gales Ferry. So it's been an incredible journey thus far. I want to once again thank you guys so much for tuning in. Super nervous to start this podcast, but it's time. I'm ready to break loose and really get into some things and more long form content. I look forward to having many of you guys on as guests, bringing vendors, different clients, different vendors, different people from the community, really pulling together to share our stories, to bring our community together, and really bring a new wave of health and wellness. So, with that being said, I want to once again thank you guys for tuning in and always remember face yourself to free yourself.